In a quiet restaurant on a rainy evening in San Francisco, a well-dressed Japanese man sat alone at a corner table. He tried to order dinner but no one could understand him. The staff grew impatient, the customers laughed, and the man's calm silence only made things stranger. No one knew who he really was, until the waitress' young daughter approached him, spoke a few words in Japanese, and changed everything that night. The evening began like any other at Harbor Lights restaurant, a cozy but busy place near the bay. Couples filled the tables, businesspeople chatted over wine, and the aroma of grilled seafood filled the air. Among the customers, one man stood out, not because of his clothes or demeanor but because of his silence. Dressed in a neat gray suit, his posture straight and composed, the man sat alone, studying the menu with a gentle curiosity. When the waiter approached, he greeted him politely in English, but the man replied softly in Japanese. The waiter froze, confused, and awkwardly gestured toward the menu again. The man smiled kindly, trying to explain, pointing to an item then another, but nothing seemed to work. Soon, frustration replaced courtesy. The waiter sighed, rolled his eyes, and left with a dismissive shrug. Around him, whispers began. "Probably doesn't even know where he is," one man joked. Another laughed. "Rich tourists, always expecting us to understand them." The Japanese man, still calm, lowered his gaze and nodded politely each time someone glanced at him. He didn't look angry, just quietly disappointed, as if used to being misunderstood. At the far end of the room, the restaurant manager approached. His tone was louder, harsher, as if shouting would bridge the language gap. "Sir, English menu?" The man simply blinked, murmuring, "Sumimasen, arigato." The tension thickened. A few customers chuckled, amused by what they saw as confusion, not realizing the humiliation behind the man's quiet eyes. And yet, through all the noise and condescension, his calm never wavered. He adjusted his tie, folded his hands, and stared at the flickering candle in front of him. To everyone else he was just a foreigner who didn't belong. But deep down, something in his stillness felt intentional, as if he were observing more than anyone realized. Behind the counter, waitress Maria Alvarez wiped her hands nervously on her apron. She had seen rudeness before, but tonight something about it stung more deeply. Maybe it was the man's quiet dignity, or the way people mocked what they didn't understand. Beside her, her daughter Sophie, only 8 years old, sat at a small table sketching in a notebook, waiting for her mother to finish her shift. Sophie noticed the scene too, the laughter, the awkward silence, the man's lonely smile. Her eyes narrowed in concern. "Mom," she whispered, "why are they laughing at him?" Maria hesitated, unsure how to explain cruelty that came from ignorance. "Some people laugh when they don't understand, sweetheart. It's wrong, but it happens." Sophie looked back at the man, then at her notebook. Something stirred inside her, a mix of curiosity and compassion. She had been learning Japanese phrases from an after-school club, fascinated by the culture, the sounds, the kindness behind the language. Without a word, she stood up, her small footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. The entire room seemed to pause as she approached the man's table. The Japanese man looked up, startled but gentle. Sophie smiled and softly said, "Konbanwa." The restaurant fell silent. The laughter stopped mid-breath. Every eye turned toward the little girl. The man's eyes widened and slowly, a smile spread across his face, the kind that carried warmth, relief, and gratitude all at once. He bowed his head slightly and replied, "Konbanwa chisana ana no ko," meaning "good evening, little girl." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Maria froze behind the counter, her heart racing. The other waiters exchanged stunned looks. For the first time that evening, someone had spoken his language, and it was a child. Sophie continued shyly, asking simple questions in broken Japanese she remembered from class. The man answered patiently, his voice filled with gentle surprise. What began as ridicule had turned into reverence. The atmosphere shifted completely. The same people who mocked him now watched in silent awe as a small girl bridged two worlds with a few words of kindness. Yet, as Maria approached to bring Sophie back, she couldn't shake a feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something far bigger than anyone in that restaurant could imagine. The restaurant had transformed from a place of discomfort into one of quiet fascination. Customers who once mocked now sat in silence, watching the strange yet heartwarming conversation unfold. The Japanese man, who introduced himself as Mr. Sato, was speaking softly, his words flowing with gratitude. Sophie, though nervous, translated bits and pieces for her mother, using the handful of phrases she remembered. "He says, 'Thank you for talking to him,'" she explained proudly, her eyes bright with innocence. Maria knelt beside her daughter, apologizing in halting English mixed with Spanish undertones. "Sir, I'm sorry for before. People were rude." She didn't know if he understood, but she bowed her head anyway. To her surprise, Mr. Sato stood, bowed even deeper, and replied in English this time, slow, careful but clear, "No problem. I understand heart." Those words struck Maria deeply. She smiled, embarrassed yet moved. For the first time that night, the entire restaurant felt humbled by the grace of a man they had misunderstood. The manager, trying to recover from his earlier behavior, hurried over. "Miss Alvarez, what does he want to order?" Maria looked to Sophie. The little girl listened as Mr. Sato spoke again in Japanese, then turned proudly to the staff. "He wants rice, soup, and green tea." The waiter scribbled it down quickly, his face red with shame. Within minutes, Mr. Sato's meal was served. He folded his hands together, whispered a short blessing in Japanese, and began eating slowly, savoring every bite. No one spoke. The room had changed. It wasn't guilt, it was reflection. People were realizing how easily they had laughed at a man who had done nothing but try to communicate. Sophie sat quietly beside him, drawing a crane on her napkin while Mr. Sato smiled. When he finished his meal, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box, worn but beautiful, carved with delicate symbols. He opened it gently and took out a golden paper crane. Handing it to Sophie, he said, "For you." Sophie held it like a treasure. Mr. Sato explained softly, "In Japan, golden crane means peace, good life." She translated his words as best as she could, her voice trembling. The diners watched, many with tears in their eyes. Then quietly Mr. Sato stood, bowed once more, and walked out into the cold night rain. Nobody knew his story, but everyone felt they had witnessed something extraordinary, the power of a single kind word spoken in the right moment. The next morning, the smell of coffee filled Harbor Lights restaurant. Maria arrived early, her daughter still half asleep beside her. It felt like any other day, until a black car pulled up outside. Two men in dark suits stepped out, holding a sleek leather briefcase. The entire staff turned to look as one of them entered and asked, "Is Miss Maria Alvarez here?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, that's me." The man handed her an envelope sealed with gold wax. "This is from Mr. Hiroshi Sato," he said formally. Confused, Maria opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, its paper thick, elegant, and marked with the faint scent of cedar. The note read, "To the mother and daughter who reminded me what kindness feels like. I am Hiroshi Sato, founder of Sato International, an investment group that builds schools for children around the world. Last night I was reminded that wealth means nothing without empathy. Your daughter spoke to me not with words alone but with heart. Please accept this small token of my gratitude." Beneath the letter was a check, for $50,000. Maria froze. Her hands trembled as she tried to breathe. The restaurant manager gasped, the staff gathered, and customers from the morning shift whispered in disbelief. Sophie looked up at her mother, confused. "Mom, what does it say?" Maria knelt, tears in her eyes. "It says you changed someone's life, baby." The men bowed politely and left as quietly as they arrived. Maria stood there, holding the letter against her chest, the same way she'd once held her daughter when she was a baby, as if afraid it might vanish. The golden crane still rested in Sophie's hand, glimmering in the sunlight streaming through the window. Word of the event spread across San Francisco. News stations came to interview Maria and Sophie. The story of the little girl who spoke Japanese to a misunderstood stranger went viral, capturing hearts across the country. But behind all the attention, Maria kept thinking about one sentence from the letter, the one that changed how she saw everything. Kindness is the language that doesn't need translation. The restaurant, once filled with laughter at others' expense, had become a place where people came to remember humility. Yet Maria couldn't help but feel that Mr. Sato's story wasn't finished. Somewhere across the ocean, he had left a piece of his heart behind, inside a paper crane, now carried by the little girl who spoke a few words, and changed everything. Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade. People from across the country sent letters, donations, and words of encouragement. Maria, overwhelmed by the attention, decided to do something meaningful with the gift Mr. Sato had left behind. "He built schools," she told Sophie one evening, looking at the check still pinned to their refrigerator. "Maybe we can do something like that too." Sophie nodded eagerly, holding the golden crane close. "Let's help kids learn languages, Mom. Like me and Mr. Sato." Maria smiled, her heart swelling with pride. And so, with the help of a few friends, the Golden Crane Learning Center was born. A small community space offering free language classes for underprivileged children. It started in a rented room behind the restaurant, but soon grew faster than Maria could have imagined. Local teachers volunteered, parents donated books, and Sophie became the youngest ambassador of kindness the city had ever seen. One day, a Japanese diplomat visited the center after hearing the story. He toured the classrooms, smiled at the children repeating Japanese greetings, and bowed deeply to Maria. "Mr. Sato spoke of you," he said gently. "You reminded him of something he lost long ago, hope." Maria was speechless. She looked at Sophie, who was teaching a small boy how to say, "thank you" in Japanese. The golden crane still sat on her desk, its paper wings untouched by time. What had started as a dinner misunderstanding had turned into a movement, proof that compassion, once shared, keeps multiplying. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Mr. Sato sat by the window of his high-rise office, overlooking the endless lights of the city. On his desk, framed neatly beside his awards and photos with world leaders, sat a simple drawing, a crayon sketch of a paper crane signed from Sophie. It was the one she'd given him before he left the restaurant, drawn on that napkin. Every morning, before diving into meetings and decisions worth millions, he'd glance at it, a reminder of that night in San Francisco. The laughter, the judgment, the innocence of a child who saw beyond language. Since then, he had changed his company's mission: business with heart. His team was now funding education programs not just in Asia, but in communities around the world. Still, he felt something missing. As he watched the rain fall against the glass, his assistant entered. "Sir, there's a letter for you. From America." He opened it carefully. Inside was a photo, Maria and Sophie standing in front of their school, surrounded by smiling children holding origami cranes. Below it, a note read, "Your kindness built this." Mr. Sato's eyes softened. He whispered in Japanese, "Arigato chisana ana no ko," "Thank you, little girl." At that moment, he realized that true wealth isn't counted in numbers but in lives touched. Across the ocean, one child's compassion had reshaped a man's purpose, and perhaps in some quiet way healed his heart. 3 years later, the Golden Crane Learning Center had become a local landmark in San Francisco. Its walls were covered with colorful drawings, maps, and handwritten messages in dozens of languages. On a bright spring afternoon, Maria was preparing a cultural fair when a black limousine stopped outside. The air shifted, quiet curiosity spread among the children. From the car stepped an older man in a crisp suit, holding a small cherry blossom branch in his hand. Maria froze. She knew that face instantly. "Mr. Sato?" she whispered. He smiled, eyes glistening with warmth. "Hello, Maria." "Hello, Sophie." Sophie, now 11, ran toward him and bowed just like she had seen in her lessons. "Konnichiwa, Mr. Sato," she said proudly. He laughed softly. "You're Japanese? Very good." Then he handed her the branch. "From Tokyo. A symbol of new beginnings." The crowd gathered as he toured the classrooms, meeting teachers and students. When he saw the golden crane displayed in a glass frame on the wall, he touched the glass gently. "This changed me," he said quietly. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You changed us too." That evening, the center hosted a small dinner in his honor. Mr. Sato spoke to the children, his voice calm and sincere. "You may not be rich," he said, "but when you show kindness, you give more than any millionaire ever could." The children applauded, but his gaze lingered on Sophie, the little girl who once broke a room's silence with 3 simple words. Their paths had crossed by chance, but destiny had written the rest. Years later, when Sophie became a young woman, she traveled to Japan to study linguistics. On her first day in Tokyo, she visited a school funded by Sato International. At the entrance stood a plaque engraved with words in both English and Japanese. "Kindness is the language that doesn't need translation." She smiled, recognizing her mother's handwriting beneath it. Inside, a framed photo of a man and a little girl with a golden crane hung on the wall. Sophie touched it gently and whispered, "Arigato, Mr. Sato." Outside, cherry blossoms drifted in the breeze, soft, fleeting, and beautiful, just like the moment that changed 2 lives forever. This is a story of triumph. Did the protagonist make the right decisions? If you were in this situation, what would you do? Share your opinion in the comments. We want to know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Memorable Stories in Overcoming, where inspiring stories of triumph and justice are shared daily.